It's a wonderful smog-free afternoon after the recent smog events from Canada. So we're all thankful for that. And have some of my near and dear friends in attendance too today. So I'm very grateful for that. Thank you all so much for coming here. Uh, we'll start with a small chant, and then we'll talk about today's topic, suffering from a Vedantic perspective. Asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityorma amritam gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So we have been doing these gatherings on Vedanta for the past few months now, and we went over a few concepts. So right from introduction to what's the meaning of Vedanta, to what are some Vedantic practices, what are some Vedantic meditation techniques, what are some Vedantic perspectives on enlightenment, Jnana Yoga. These are some of the topics we covered so far. Today, it's another big topic, suffering. Suffering from a Vedantic perspective. Even before I say anything, as I mentioned, there's a lot of my near and dear friends in attendance today. And there's another one who's known me for 32 years. He's at the other side right now. I invited him to the lecture, and he said, that's the one suffering I'm going to forego. I'm not going to be I'm not going to be lectured by you on suffering. Please spare me that suffering. And as lighthearted a comment as it was, I did start thinking about it, right? He knows me. I'm 37 years old, and he knows me for 32 years now. And from his perspective, he has seen me ever since I was in the kindergartens, ever since I was a little kid, ever since I was, an adolescent, and then an adult. And then all these years, we have been constantly in touch. And even as our physical selves, the Annamaya Kosha, changed over the years, as it does. Even as our mental selves, we went through so many evolutions of mental templates. Even as all of that evolved, there is one sense of unchanging self in every one of us. Every one of us, when we go through these stages, right, we look at our old pictures and say, oh, look how youthful I was. Or if we start, these days, nothing dies on the internet, right? So you start going through some of your emails even from a few years ago, communication, correspondence with your near and dear ones, and say, oh my God, did I used to think that? So even the thought changes, but who is asking even these questions? That unchanging sense of I remains constant. What does change are, though, as we even in Raja Yoga we say, vrittis. In yoga, when we say yoga chitta vritti nirodha, vritti, a good translation into English would be impressions. Impressions on the mind. The impression could be in the form of an emotion. It could be in the form of a memory. It could be in the form of an understanding, or it could be a veritable combination of any of these. And one of those deeply impactful impressions is suffering. Just as how we have all these different aspects of the human experience, we have happy memories, we have skills, we have joys, we have emotions. Suffering is also one such vritti, and a particularly important one too. To give an analogy, right? To get to the temple here today, to the yoga class, even to the speech here, we had to take different routes, no? Each one of us came from a different destination. We punch in the final destination on our GPS, and then it shows you where to make a right, where to make a left, so on and so forth. You know, there are times when we set out to some place, but then we get caught up in between, you know, like you want to get to the end goal, but then maybe if you have time at hand, you end up going into a store and then you end up spending some extra time in the store, and that becomes a diversion, right? Nothing wrong with it because you're spending time there, but ultimately you do have to get to the destination. So in the same way, suffering is yet another diversion in our path of understanding our true self, and a pretty major detour at that. Vedanta has so many different perspectives on suffering. One thing Vedanta is really good at is characterization. You know, there's a lot of characterizing things into different categories. So as far as the physical world is concerned, suffering is grossly classified into three aspects: adhyatmika, adhibhautika, and adidaivika. So this is the Sanskrit term. Adhyatmika is suffering that we endure because of this body and mind. This is suffering caused purely by our own existence. We might get maladies, we might get different kinds of diseases, mental health issues, trauma, all this that concerns and which is caused by this body and mind, it's adhyatmika. Adhibhautika is suffering caused by another being. May it be like, a mosquito bite, or, well, in Sanskrit, they particularly say either just to give an example, they either say a mosquito or a tiger. So just to span out. We have neither here in New York, but seasonally, yes, we do have mosquitoes, yes. So it's the suffering caused by other beings. It might even be your boss at work, who's bothering you a lot. And there you go, that becomes another source of suffering, adhibhautika. And then last but not the least, adidaivika. Daivika is nature. Adidaivika is suffering caused by nature, climate change, smog, flooding, forest fires. It's a whole laundry list of it. Now, if you think of it, it dawns upon us that we do live amidst a whole lot of suffering now. Our own body and mind, suffering caused by the other person, other beings, suffering caused by the nature. And then one begins to wonder, what is to do in the face of such magnitude of sufferings? Another beautiful analogy here was given by none himself than Buddha. Back 2000 years ago, when Buddha was giving his sermons, his student does ask, one of the students asks, "Hey, Buddha, you say you are enlightened, but I see that you are growing old. A lot of your disciples have grown old and they have even died. They are constantly suffering. What is your solution to this? And Buddha beautifully elucidates a story of a man, a human, a person being shot at by 2 arrows. So think of a person who was shot at with an arrow, and then the man is suffering, the person is suffering, and then he's shot by a second arrow immediately, and the suffering doubles. So Buddha goes, our condition is exactly like a person being shot at by 2 arrows. The first arrow is the arrow shot at us by the external world. All these, Adhibhautika, Adhidaivika, and Adhyatmika, all these sufferings, we are shot at by the first arrow. The second arrow is the suffering that is elicited within us, our internal suffering. And Buddha goes, the solution that I am going to give you concerns the second arrow, not the first arrow. He's very gentlemanly like. The first arrow, sorry, we can't do anything about it because, world is the world. However, the degree of suffering that you endure can be addressed by how you are either going to react or not react or just witness internally, and the solution would be in how to address the second shot. In the same way, the Advaitic approach is also very similar to this. In the Mundaka Upanishad, we have a beautiful example. They give an example of 2 birds sitting on a tree. This is an ancient Upanishad. This goes at least 2,500, 3,000 years back. And they give this example of 2 birds sitting on a tree. So there are 2 birds on a tree. One is sitting motionless, and the other bird, it's sitting on a higher branch, and the second bird, which is on a lower branch, is hopping from branch to branch, being very active, and then it is indulging in the actions of the world. It is pecking at one fruit, and it likes the taste of one fruit, gets attracted to it, and then it pecks at another fruit, takes like it feels bitter, and it's like taken aback, and then it is engaging in the world of actions. The bird sitting on the higher branch, it neither partakes in the action nor withdraws from the action, and it's simply observing the second bird. Now, what happens to the second bird is, as it is going through all these actions, it pecks at a particularly bitter fruit, and it receives a deep shock, and then it pauses for a minute. After, it's like particularly bitter, it's taken aback, and then once it stops acting, it looks, it raises its head, and it sees that there's a second bird sitting on the higher branch, shining forth, and it goes, oh, I want to be like that second bird. How can I be like that second bird? So slowly but surely, it starts hopping toward the second bird. But then, as it happens, in between, gets distracted again, and then picks at another fruit, and then gets entangled in the world again. So on and so forth. This continues until a point comes when the second bird really decides, you know what, I want to do this, and then takes a firm step toward that second bird. When it comes near the higher bird, something interesting happens. It realizes that it was that higher bird all the while. There was no second bird. The core concept of non-dual awakening, non-dual Advaita is that the world is but an illusion that appears to the self. Just as how that second bird was indulging in all these actions, reaping the effects of its actions, when it realized, when it became still, and when it became the witness, it realized that there is no second bird, that it was the higher bird all along, which is also the core teaching of Advaita, that in the very first gathering, as we said, Tattvamasi, you are that. When you say Aham Brahmasmi, the concept of Sat, Chit, Ananda, existence, consciousness, bliss, it is contained in your true self. And the suffering of the world is what is presented to you as a perceived reality. Now, one would be tempted to say it's great for the true self, but what about me? I'm still suffering. It is a very valid question to raise, that a lot of what is being said in Vedanta, especially on suffering, might sound just as words. It all starts out with words, right? But here again, it's very important to go back to the practice of Vedanta. As I mentioned 2 or 3 classes ago, Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. Now, Shravana is what we are doing right now, just sharing and listening to the word. Manana would be when you take a step further and you really start reflecting on what was heard. And then Nididhyasana is when the reflections become a lived reality. Only when the philosophy translates from just being a word to being a reflection to being a lived reality is when we can really and truly assert that we are that higher bird. Until then, no matter how much we might try to tell ourselves, oh, you know what, I'm the Brahman, I'm Tattvamasi, I'm that. But do you still feel the pain? Do you still feel the suffering? Yes, I do. And you're still not that yet. Which is why in the last gathering, when we talked about the silence, that silence of the Om takes such a central place in all these teachings. If we think about the 3 stages of life, right? When we talk about life, what is life? It's mostly the awakened state that we are in, that we say, oh, this is life. What happens when you go to sleep? Right? Just processing the awakened state. And then what happens when you go to deep sleep? Well, we all need deep sleep, and that's when we feel really rejuvenated. But then we have to come back to this awakened, to this awakening state, right? When we juxtaposition that to the concept of Om, the silence at the end of the Om, that silence at the end of the Om is analogous to the higher bird that is witnessing all the actions of the world. Jagrata, Swapna, and Sushupta, these 3 states of the human experience is being witnessed by the true self, Tattvamasi, which bears the silent witness. And only when we are able to merge with that silence is also when we'll be liberated by the sufferings of the world. So that's the perspective on suffering from Vedanta. We shall do a small exercise, because the whole concept of nididhyasana is to make it real for us, right? If it's not real, then these are just words, right? We shall do a small exercise and then we shall take some questions and we can wrap it up. You can either do it with your eyes open or with your eyes closed. If you do it with your eyes closed, it's easier to focus, right? So take a deep breath. Think of, recall from your memory any event or person or any memory that you think annoys you, an annoying memory. Think of the annoyance that it's causing you. Live through either the incident, it could be a person, it could be an incident, or it could be like a general situation. Live through that annoying sensation for a minute. Now, as you're thinking about that annoyance, shift the focus on who is doing the thinking. Is that annoyance you, or is that annoyance appearing to you? Feel your physical reaction as you're living through that annoying situation. Do you feel yourself tightening up? Do you feel your brows knitting? Do you feel generally annoyed? Sit with that annoyance for a moment and shift the focus to who is getting annoyed. Are you able? Ask yourself, and it's perfectly okay if you're not able to, ask yourself if you're able to disassociate the annoyance from yourself. And even as you're feeling yourself not up, ask yourself, am I that, or am I experiencing that? It is perfectly okay if you're still annoyed. That's the whole point. But even as you are being annoyed, ask yourself, who is annoyed? Am I the annoyance itself, or is the annoyance appearing to me? Let's just sit with that for a few moments. And we can now slowly open our eyes. See, the point of this exercise was to usually we focus on happy thoughts, right? But since today's focus was on suffering, a closer related emotion is annoyance. And the whole point was to bring in a wedge between the emotions that we experience and our own true self. That was the whole point of the exercise. And this can actually be done with any emotions that you feel. You know, it could be when you're feeling ecstatic, when you're feeling particularly down, when you're feeling particularly depressed, or when you're feeling particularly happy. If you let that one constant awareness run in the background of, I'm feeling this okay, but am I really this? You know, they have this feeling, they have this saying in English. When they say, when you're like really suffering, they say, woe is me. And Vedanta would say, woe is what is thought is you. So woe is not really you, but woe is an event that is observed by you. On that note, we conclude today's sharing on suffering. And if anyone has any questions, yes, go ahead.
I don't know if you finished speaking on it, or what was the second arrow for the Buddha. Because I don't think I picked it up. What
Yes.
The second arrow means.
Yes. So the second arrow, the meaning of the second arrow is that when we are hit by a situation, right? Like, for example, well, a couple of days ago, I was served a notice by IRS. You know, that's the first arrow. IRS hit me. I had to like pay pending taxes. Got me very annoyed.
That was your meditation.
Exactly. But then once it was meditated upon, what happened. But then how was I reacting to the situation? Where was the bulk of the pain originating from? Was it from the event itself, or was it by my reaction to the event, which was ultimately also going to have ripple effects on 5 different things? Oh, that day I went to work very cross, and then a couple of people came in late, and then I became that annoying supervisor who said, hey, why are you late? You know, I became the source of suffering for the other people. But then once I started doing it, I asked myself, wait a minute, where is this coming from? And then I realized, oh, wait a minute, I got this letter from IRS. Is this at the root of it? And then once I was able to make my peace with the fact that, okay, this has to be done, to a large extent, I was able to, you know, be calm and collected and then carry on with my day. So this is just an isolated example. Yes, we are done. Yes. It's the Maya of time. Yes, we all have to abide by the Maya.
This is Q&A.
Yes, yeah, we're just doing Q&A.
Did you close it?
No, I did not.
You have to. They can't hear.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Yikes.
Right, right, right.
Is this going on
Hold on.
YouTube?
Oh, okay. We can